All right, it should be recording. Okay, this will be clipped out of the stream for later. So we're gonna watch I Am Pro-Life, Change My Mind by Steven Crowder. We'll see how much of it we can get through. I might end up watching the whole thing too. We'll see. This might be the whole stream. Also, maybe I'll cut out the Nick Fuentes part later too, because that's a funny clip.
Okay, this latest installment of Change My Mind is regarding the abortion issue. I'm pro-life, change my mind. So probably the most contentious that
Oh, Not Gay Jared. R.I.P. Not Gay Jared. Oh man, I miss that dude. Once Not Gay Jared left, that's when I stopped watching Louder with Crowder. This was like my show. I used to, like all the episodes before like episode 100. I like watched all of those. This was the show that I watched. Like this was my show. I would watch Steven Crowder, and he taught me politics. And now looking back, like I realize, okay, this dude is dumb as fuck. Like this dude is cringe. But this was my introduction to politics. This Steven Crowder.
Discussed.
I would say so.
Could certainly be argued. Warning, this one is it 45 minutes?
It's like 53.
It's 53 minutes, so it's very long.
An hour
and I know that when you're watching this, it can feel very frustrating. I know I did. So I think it's important to lead with where this conversation ends up, because that will really help you understand the context of the conversation.
So when would it be okay, I guess, to put limitations?
Let's just watch the whole fucking conversation. Where does the conversation begin? I don't want to watch Steven Crowder talking about the conversation.
And kind of take you through the series of arguments that brought us to that conclusion.
See, look at this. Like, why do people take this long to get into an actual video? Like, they talk for 6 minutes and 22 seconds. Like, some of my videos back in the day, that was how long the video was. But these people have a 6-minute intro into their videos. Good lord.
What was your name, by the way? Jen, Steven, nice to meet you.
Whoa, what the fuck? Why is it tripping like that?
All right, Jen, well, here, you can hold this if you want.
Okay.
Just, talking to the, you're talking to the stick.
Change my...
Why is he like so awkward? Is Steven Crowder autistic too? Are all of the people that I watch autistic? Fuck, just kidding. Oh man. Oh shit, for the people that are watching the clip, they won't know what I'm talking about. Apparently all the people that I watch are autistic, because I watch Nick Fuentes and it seems that he's autistic. I watch Vosh and I think Vosh says that he's probably autistic, and Destiny is probably the iffy one. I don't know what he is.
Beg your pardon?
Oh, and when I say autistic, I'm not using it as an insult, by the way. Just to be absolutely clear, just to be 100% clear, it's fine to be autistic. There's no problem with it. I thought I was autistic for the longest time, and maybe I am. Maybe I'll take a test later and see if I am. Damn, I love the starting songs. Yeah, the starting songs of these Crowder videos are nice.
No, you just talk to me. Yeah, we're just having a conversation. So,
okay.
Jen, I'm Steven. I can hold it if you want me to.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Fine.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes people get a little more formal.
awkward.
I don't bite. So, all right. I appreciate it. Before we even set up, you were really quick to say, okay, you seem surprised. You said, is that for real? When you saw the sign, I'm pro-life, change my mind. Why? What was so surprising about it?
In my experience, dealing with pro-life, either protests or discussions, normally it's not changed my mind. Normally it's...
this whole change my mind thing is such a ruse. Like, Steven Crowder's mind is not going to get changed. He's really just doing this so that he can dunk on people who are just walking around the streets and they're not super informed on politics. I think everybody should be aware of this. Like, he just goes to campuses, or he just goes to the middle of cities and is like, change my mind. I'm open to having my mind changed on this issue that I've been talking about online for years and years now. And I have all these sources under the table that I'll pull out if you give me any sort of argument. Like, he's not here to get his mind changed. He's here to dunk on people. It's very obvious.
Of actual abortions, or trying to guilt women or shame them into decisions that they've made. It's not really about having a repartee. It's more about kind of either a religious ideology or their personal ideology, and just kind of
It's always a religious ideology. I promise you. Like, religious people always try to say, "Oh no, it's not religious." It's just the scientific conclusion, but it's always religious. Like, the second you leave a religion behind, you're not going to be pro-life anymore. That's how it usually works. Because a lot of times in a religion, like, they constantly propagandize to the members of their church, the members of that community. So like I would go to religion class, and there would be a day at like our religion class on the Wednesday nights. They'd like bring in some anti-abortion dude, and he'll just like show ultrasounds and be like this is a baby. Would you really want to kill this baby? And yeah, they try to be scientific, but it's so feelings based, and it's not actually based in any sort of facts about. And there's no like actual argument about when is it actually a human? They always are, or that's kind of their argument, like, oh, it's actually a human the second they come together because of the DNA. But there's a lot of things wrong with that, because a blueprint is not a house, and a DNA is simply like the blueprint of a house. Let's think about it like you're building a house, for example. You have this blueprint. That's what the DNA is. If you shred up the blueprint, you're not destroying a house. Now, once the house is built, once you build up the house, and the house can stand on its own, and you go through and knock it down, well, then you're destroying a house, and that's not a good thing. That would be the equivalent of killing a baby in that sense. But until you build that house, until it's actually a house, or in the context of abortion, until it's actually a human being, you can't. Or you can terminate it because it's not a human being yet. And it's obviously a life, I would agree with that. However, do we treat all life like a human life? Obviously not. Just because something is alive doesn't mean we can't kill it. Like, think about a cow, for example. We can kill a cow. No problem with that. Unless you're a vegan, of course, but that's not an argument I want to get into today. Or if there's like a little bacteria, can we kill that little bacteria? Can we kill a plant? I'm sure everyone agrees we can kill a plant. Do you think plants are alive? Obviously, plants are alive. So the standard here isn't that it's a living organism. The standard here is, when is it a human? And that's the thing that these pro-life people seem to miss. And this is an issue that I've like struggled with a lot, because I grew up Catholic, and this used to be an issue that I was so certain on. But like, after thinking about it, I've come to a new conclusion. I'm not 100% certain on where that line should be drawn. I think it definitely should be at least after the first trimester, anywhere up to the end of the pregnancy. That's sort of the spectrum of like, okay, the line should be drawn somewhere in here, but for sure during the first trimester, you should be able to abort the baby. During the second, probably. I would say probably. During the third trimester, that's where I'm like, I don't know. And we can get into all my standards for different things and all the qualifications that I use.
Trying to force that on you rather than
Sure.
trying to have it understand it, having a conversation.
Bruno said dunk on him. And then Daniel Kraus says, I mean, all videos are similar to this, or just about the same thing, making fun of people who are not that informed. I mean, that's what I'm doing right now, making fun of Steven Crowder. But yeah, I know a lot of people do that. There was a Vosh video that I watched that was like, he's responding to people who are at those coronavirus protests, and it's like just showing like the most crazy people in those protests. It reminded me of one of those videos of those conservatives walking around and like, oh, look at these crazy SJWs going crazy. It's like, yeah, you're picking the low-hanging fruit here. I thought Vosh would be above that, because he criticizes the conservatives for doing that, but then he goes and does it when it's convenient for him.
Where we can understand each other,
Right.
and where we're coming from, and why we have these different values.
Right.
And also because we're across from the art museum, so I didn't know if it was an experiment, like a social experiment, to see what people.
You thought it just might be ironic?
I just thought I would ask.
Okay. No, yeah, it is for real. So I am pro-life.
Okay.
No way, this dude's for real pro-life. I thought that was ironic. What kind of smart person would be pro-life?
And this is a series. We've done it on gun control. We've done it on free speech. Just listening to the other side, giving someone who.
Daniel Kraus says, I would say until it's born, you should probably be able to abort it, because any other line would be pretty much arbitrary. We'll see. We'll get into it. I have a few arguments that I want to make there. I'm leaning towards thinking that maybe, But I also very much lean to after like the second trimester or the first trimester, it should be illegal. So I have a lot of thoughts on this, but we'll get into it as the video progresses.
Genuinely believes from the opposite side of the political, cultural spectrum than I do to change my mind, to convince me, and have a respectful but critical dialogue of issues that, you know, we all talk about in today's political realm, but often it's shouted about.
Right.
So
Understandable.
I am open to having my mind changed.
And I have an international relations degree. I've worked for the United Nations. I've worked for the State Department. So I'm very much about understanding and coalition building and
Sure.
discussion. I am not about the show.
Nobody's like anti-discussion in general. Like they argue that, oh, the left wants to shut people down because the crazies on the left are just going to protest. Well, what's wrong with protesting? You can protest a speaker talking. Like, it's not... You can protest the fact that your campus like had a speaker talk. Now I wouldn't be for shutting any of that down. But to protest against something, that's not censorship. There's nobody censoring people. And it seems like people on both sides are very pro-discussion. Some of the most common people who you see in debates are people like Vosh and Destiny. And those guys are both leftists. Steven Crowder, he does not talk with people. He backed out of a Sam Cedar discussion. I think it was like because his dad told him, oh yeah, I don't think you could debate Sam Cedar. That might be wrong. Hold up. Sam Cedar, Steven Crowder debate.
Steven Crowder is afraid to debate Sam Cedar. Changed my mind.
I saw that too. We should put that on.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to watch that whole video and distract from this, but like Steven Crowder is afraid to debate actual people. Like, he's not this like, oh, I'm open to conversate with anybody. Like, Steven Crowder does not debate people. That's like very clear. Now, there's people on the right who do debate people, but I mean, Steven Crowder's not one of them. He's not one of these people who's interested in the open conversations. He's interested in spewing his talking points from the safety of his studio and dunking on stupid leftists.
Okay.
So, also my daughter is standing right here. She's wonderful.
Oh, what's up? What's up, Nebraska Train? You're kind of... Thanks, bro. I love you. Hold up. I know who you are, my dude. What's up, Colin? Hold up. I got for just in honor of you, I gotta play a certain song. Hold up. Where is it? Fuck. Where did it go? Where is it? No, I can't find it. Hold up. Shit. I have to play his song. I can't find it. There we go. We'll play this in the background for a little bit. We'll turn it down quite a bit, though, because I'm still trying to talk about Steven Crowder and dunk on this idiot. All right. All right, let's keep going.
Shining example, honor student. I had her when I was 16. Life is very important to me.
Great.
But recently I had a different kind of experience.
So as I promised, we'll keep these commentaries really brief, but one thing you'll notice with Change My Mind, anytime someone comes up who's really hardcore against our viewpoint, they have invariably set up some kind of a victim status.
Almost always.
Trans disabled, I'm literally autistic. In this case, someone who...
What the fuck? She's just telling you her personal experience with the thing, and you're like, oh, all these people are like, oh, I'm autistic or I'm trans disabled. Like, she's just telling you her experience that informs her opinion on that. Like, you don't have to be a dick about this. Good lord.
needed an abortion out of a medical necessity. They use it because when they feel their argument is on shaky ground or their position, they revert back to it. You'll see.
They haven't even made an argument yet, but I mean, a lot of people they use personal anecdote a lot in arguments. I mean, that this is the problem with setting up your booth in the middle of just like a public place for people, just random people to walk up for you to just dunk on them. Like, not everybody's going to be super informed and thought about these positions a bunch. Like, I mean, this is the sort of thing that Steven Crowder does. He doesn't debate big name people. He doesn't debate people like Sam Cedar, for example. And I don't like Sam Cedar. I have a lot of problems with Sam Cedar. We could get into his whole like arguments against taxation being theft, and we can argue about that sort of stuff. But the fact that Steven Crowder, he claims to be all focused on like, oh, open dialogue, I'll talk to anybody, and then he just goes and dunks on people in the streets and doesn't actually argue with any big name people, and then he'll criticize them for having bad argumentative techniques because they can't justify their points. Yeah, these people haven't thought about these positions as much as you have. Obviously, they're just random people walking in the street. They have another life besides politics. Debate somebody who's focused on politics.
I am married. I also, during my experience at the State Department, was a prisoner of war, so I have very severe PTSD that causes a seizure disorder. And I was on seizure medication when I found out that I was pregnant. And I don't know if you know this or not, but when fetuses are developing, it's actually nerve bundles that create, the arm or the leg or fingers or whatever.
Sure.
And seizure medication by design is created to limit nerve bundles and certain synapses and certain processing, because a person with a seizure disorder means that they're firing too much or in a way that they shouldn't be.
Okay.
So, found out that I was pregnant, went to my OBGYN, the same one that delivered my daughter, and literally on the sonogram.
Like, I'm not sure that these personal anecdotes are the best way to make a point and argue about things. Like, that's pure emotion-based. That's definitely a problem. But, like, it's, like, the fact that he's, like, criticizing her for talking about that and, like, attacking her because she's just telling her background and what informs her opinion on this seems to be kind of fucked up, kind of a dick move. But whatever. If she does keep going back to it, I'd say that's not the best debate technique. So maybe he should debate people who know better how to argue these points and people off the streets.
Watch my baby die cardiac cell by cardiac cell by cardiac cell, not because of anything, a choice that I didn't make, not because I wasn't, not because the child was outside of a marriage, not because, and there was nothing that I could do. I could either continue to, at first it had 7 cardiac cells, and then we went back to another sonogram and it had 4, and then it had 3, and then it had 2. So my options were to literally let the fetus die and begin rotting inside of me, or to go to a clinic based on Texas law and get it taken care of before I had to actually physically experience that death.
Right.
So to me, based on the safety of, my safety and if I did,
I think most people, even pro-life people, have to agree with this situation of abortion. Like, if the baby's gonna die anyways, if it's just gonna lead to potential health risks, they have to agree with that case of abortion, even if it's alive at that point, even if it's a human life at that point, because you don't want to have those health risks, and if you know for certain that baby's gonna die, so
have that option available to me, and the trauma that would have caused. I think that there are unique situations, especially when a woman's been raped or whatever, that's something that should be available to them as a decision that they make.
Okay. Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure, of course.
So you first came in, I know you said that you said life was very important to you, but you didn't say pro-life. So can we, I guess, establish what that means first before I kind of want to unpack?
She believes in human life, not the life of non-humans. That's what it means when you say you're in favor of life but not pro-life. You don't prioritize fetuses over humans, basically, and these fetuses are not humans yet.
The personal story, which I can only imagine is harrowing. I've never been through that. I'm not going to act as though I can relate to that. I'll do my best as we discuss it. But you said life is very important to you, and then went into that story. What does that mean?
I've fought for life my entire life. I've risked my life for other people's lives. That's why I went into international relations.
Okay.
I worked in...
I mean, the altruism here, but that it is what it is. That's not terrible either. That's like, okay, you can devote your life to like helping other people. That's fine. There's no problem with that. If that's in your self-interest, if that's something, if you don't feel like, oh, that's just buying my morality and like preventing and suppressing my guilt for not devoting my life to other people.
United Nations, I was very successful at setting something up for people that live in rural areas, setting up social and economic development for them.
Okay.
It's something that I dedicated my education to. It's something I dedicated my career to. It's something that I was eventually captured by rebels in West Africa, trying to still fight for.
Right.
So it's not something that I take lightly
Sure.
at all. But the option for a woman, especially given the position that I was in, and when my obstetrician that I
I'm
had.
gonna hold this a little closer because of all the ambulances. So, forgive me. I don't mean to intrude, but we won't be able to hear you that well. Go ahead.
But when I went to my obstetrician when I was pregnant with my daughter at 16 or 15, actually, I had her when I was 16. She didn't say, what are you doing? Go take care of this.
So you wouldn't consider? So you asked if we were serious because you definitely don't.
I had to turn off the music because like that background noise combined with all the background noise from the video, it was too much.
Don't consider yourself pro-life then, in that sense.
Not in that sense.
Okay. So my next question is, you used the word, you said rather than endure that trauma.
Right.
Did you mean that for the baby or yourself?
I
What baby? It's not a baby yet.
meant it, I guess, primarily watching it. Every time I went in was increasingly more traumatic. Watching each cardiac cell die off was
Sure.
increasingly more traumatic.
Do you mean for you or traumatic on the?
For me and for my husband.
Okay.
Right.
So-
At that point in time,
This dude wants her to say like, oh, it's traumatic for the baby. It's traumatic for this fetus. Like the fetus isn't a human yet. It doesn't matter yet. I don't know at what point in the pregnancy it was, but it's still not a human yet. Like what matters here is the husband and the wife, what they care about. And she's so focused on like, okay, this human life is what's important. My life is what's important. My husband's life is what's important. And then Crowder's like, wait, you don't care about how the fetus feels about all this? It's like, okay, the fetus doesn't feel yet. The fetus isn't viable yet. Like, okay, so I guess I should explain sort of my position on abortion. My thing is, I mean, I think that there's a sense in which I like the idea of thinking that, okay, it's possible to do it during all 3 stages of pregnancy. However, I think there's this sense in which if a baby is at a point in its development where it is viable, where it can survive apart from some host, the host being like a mother or some sort of like incubator, like apart from the mother or something like that, then it's a human being. Because I would argue that it's individuated at that point. I would argue that it is a separate life at that point. It's a separate living human organism at that point. But before that, it's entirely dependent for its existence and its further development on the mother. So, like, think about it like that building a house analogy that I thought that I was arguing about or that I was discussing earlier. Like, it becomes a house, I would argue, when it's at a point in its development where it can stand on its own, where it has everything built, basically. That's when it becomes a house, and before that, though, when you're just like setting down the bricks, it's not a house yet until it's something that can stand. Until it's something that can stand without like extra construction beams holding it up or something like that. And the extra construction beams would be like the fact that, okay, you need the incubator, you need the mother or something like that. So I would say until it's viable to live apart from any further development, if it can live without further development, if it can live entirely independently without further development, then I would argue that it should be considered a human life. So that's why I would generally argue for the idea of after the second trimester it being illegal again. Now I go back and forth on that because that line also could be arbitrary. Like couldn't we also say, like in the house analogy, Like, it's not actually a house until the house is completed, until all the construction workers step away and say, okay, it's done, the house is completed. And that's something I'm not 100% sure on yet. There's a lot of room for debate on this particular issue. But to say that something that is not a house is a house, or to say that the blueprint is a house, or to say that a few bricks laying on the ground is a house, is so clearly a misapplication of this concept that it's just so anti-conceptual. It's the same thing with a baby as well. Like, just to say a few cells, or to say a DNA strand, or those sort of things, to say that those things are considered or those things should be considered a baby or a human being is so backwards. It's so wrong to consider that, because that's not what a human being is yet. It's not a human being at that point. It's not an individuated human being. Now, where exactly that line is, I have my different arguments. I have those two different arguments that I've argued. It's the idea of, okay, when the umbilical cord is cut, one example, or when it is developmentally viable, when it's at a stage in its development where it's viable. I'm trying to be clear that it's about the stage in its development, because I want to prevent that argument that basically says that, okay, but what about when in the future there's going to be more, like, we're going to be able to just put a baby in like an incubator and then it'll develop from there. Well, at that point, it's not at a point in its development where it can survive independently of developmental assistance. So this sort of incubator. Solvent Man says, I think your misunderstanding might be wrong. A fetus is not a human. It's dependent on what you understand as a human. From a biological point of view, it's human. Morality, care, what species, entity. What is that? I don't know what your last sentence means. From a biological point of view, it's a human. Oh, you forgive my English. Oh, English might not be your first language. So I don't know what this last sentence means, but I would argue that that it's not a human from a biological point of view. It's a strip of its DNA. This is why I have the house versus blueprint analogy to paint this clearly. The DNA is just a blueprint until it's actually at a point in its development where it can be considered a human. Actually, I think a good argument can be made for the idea of once it has consciousness, because when it has consciousness, when the fetus is conscious, then we can consider it a human being, because a human being is sort of defined by its rational faculty. Now, it obviously doesn't have a developed rational faculty yet, but it has a conscious mind at that point, and that's like the beginning of rationality. So that's where the right should begin. But it's really hard to define consciousness in this context. I could actually look up when is a fetus conscious. 5 months. So if this is the truth, which I don't know exactly how they consider consciousness, and I'm very untrusting of psychology, but this seems like it would be the best line then. This seems like it would be the best line based on the definition of what we define a human being as the rational animal.
Depending on what you believe, the nervous system hadn't really been fully formed, so I don't know how much trauma but it was dying nonetheless, and there was nothing that we could have done at that point in time based on the medication that I was taking.
It's interesting to me that you just used the word dying. Why would you use that word?
Because its cardiac cells were dying. So without those cardiac cells, its heart stopped, and then it...
Sure.
Right.
But you said it was dying, not cardiac cells. It. So that would we agree that was a life?
That it was a potential life.
Now, important to note here, this is not a...
It is a life, but it's not a human life. Oh my gosh. Like, how is this something that's not hard to understand? Or how is this something that's hard to understand? It's not a human life at that point. Now, like, it has the DNA of a human, but that doesn't make it a human life. That's an important distinction here, because a human being is a animal with a rational faculty, with a consciousness. I think consciousness would be the best sort of definition. And before it has that, it's simply a potential human. It has the DNA. It has those things. It's in the same way that a house where you're building the bricks or where you just have the blueprint is a potential house. This fetus is a potential human being. It's not an actual human being yet. It hasn't become actual yet. This is an important dichotomy here, because when you conflate the two, when you consider a potential and actual, like what Steven Crowder does in this context, you come to this conclusion that a fetus, after conception, it is a human being, which is the wrong conclusion.
A debate tactic. This is actually very important when discussing an issue, to find out what your terms are, to define them so you're both understanding issues. And notice how she sort of she jumps from word lily pad to word lily pad, using her own definitions.
Absolutely.
That happens a lot. And now it makes sense, because she doesn't care where life.
She hasn't thought about this issue a lot. People don't have super solid definitions when they don't think about how are we going to define this constantly, like you do, Stephen. Debate somebody who actually has position of things. Hell, I'd fucking debate you on abortion, but obviously you don't want to debate me because you have 4.4 million subscribers and I have about 300.
Life begins anyway. She uses the word dying. She uses the word cell. She talks about heartbeat and then backtrack.
Because it's a life, but it's not a human life. It's still a potential human life. It's still a life, but it's not a human life. We don't value non-human life. That's not something that we have a high value for. Now, some people can value a potential human life in their given context. In certain contexts, it's important to value that because you know it's going to become a human life eventually. However, if you don't have the resources to afford a human life, if you made a mistake in becoming pregnant, well, then this potential human life is not something that's valuable to you. Now, an actual human life, when it becomes actual, that is something that is valuable. It's not something you can just kill off, because I would argue that human beings have rights and that we cannot violate those rights just based on a whim, basically. However, when it's still in this potential form, that's when you assign its value to it. You can say, okay, I want a human being in the future, so I'm going to value this potential for human life. However, if you don't want a human being in the future, if a human being in the future is not something that you can afford, then it would be incorrect to place value on that potential human life.
Because none of it matters. We're okay with abortion.
And then, namaste, I will review Sonichu after I've finished this video. I got you.
It's up to 9 months. Let's keep that context.
Was it a potential life or a life?
It was a potential life.
Okay, can you help me with this?
She's struggling to define these terms. When she says a potential life, she should be saying potential human life. Because when she says potential life, it makes it seem like she's saying that it's not actually alive yet, which is factually incorrect. But it's not a human life yet, which is... These are really nuanced discussions, and it gets very difficult to argue when you haven't thought about these issues a lot.
Again, being pro-life, differentiating between the idea, the potential of life versus a life. So when you say that as a potential life...
Like your sperm cells are alive, are you committing genocide every time you masturbate? Obviously not, because it's not an actual human being yet. It's still a potential. It has human DNA in it. Now it obviously has less chromosomes than a human fetus, but it's still human DNA. And when I say human fetus, I don't mean an actual human. Human fetus. The word fetus there is an important qualifier. I can see somebody like nitpicking everything that I said. And he said, "Oh, he said a human fetus." Yeah, it's still a human fetus. It's not an actual human being.
Potential for what?
A potential to grow into a baby that could self-sustain on some level outside of its mother's womb.
So you mean potential human. So the potential human is fulfilled into actual human. I want to make sure that I'm clear here so we understand the kind of the terms we're following. Mm-hmm. The potential human then becomes a human when it is sustainable outside of the womb.
I think that that's true. I think that until that point it is a decision between, because it is completely dependent on the mother.
Sure.
So to enforce certain laws.
Yes, that's important. The decision of whether a potential life ought to be valued or not is a decision of the mother, because it's up to her whether she wants an actual human or doesn't want an actual human in the future, whether she can afford it or she cannot, or whether that's something that is convenient for her at her stage in life or not. So the determinant of what value that being has It obviously, value, when we think about value, it comes from an interaction between consciousness and reality. It's when a value is objective. There's no consciousness in that baby yet. There's no consciousness in that baby, so it can't have value for itself. So what it basically needs, because it's not conscious yet, it's still a potential for consciousness. How do we determine whether it has value or not? Well, there's this mother who looks at this potential human, human being, and can say, okay, does this potential have value? Based on my conscious mind and my interaction with reality, would this objectively benefit or harm my life? And from there, she can basically decide, okay, this potential human fetus has value because, it is going to improve my life in these ways. I want to take care of a child. I want to raise a child. That's something that seems like it's a very beneficial experience for me. Or she can decide, I don't have the resources to afford this baby. This potential human being is not a value to me. It is a disvalue to me. It will destroy my ability to achieve my values. And because of that, she can say, no, this is not a value. And it is not a value because of that. Because of her relationship with reality. Because of her consciousness and its relationship with reality. Now, the human fetus, it doesn't have consciousness yet. It cannot value things yet. It's not a valuer yet. So it cannot value its own life in that context. The person that can evaluate whether or not that fetus is a value is the mother, is the human being that has consciousness and has that baby in its stomach and it will be affected by it coming out.
Laws or certain acts on her that the baby wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. I don't.
What up, Diego?
Exactly.
I think I saw Kirk earlier too. What's up, Kirk?
If you could extricate the baby and put it in a incubator pod or something, then maybe that would be more ideal. But forcing.
Sure, but it would still not have developed to a point of viability at that point yet.
A woman who, in my situation.
Dog, you gotta stop spamming at my chat, dude.
Was just taking seizure medication,
Sure.
because of whatever. And again, not that it matters 100% whether you're married or not, but a lot of people say, but I was. And
yeah.
It wasn't an economic situation.
No, I don't want to get into at all any of the economic or the moral argument.
Dog, I'm gonna ban you. I'm sorry. Put the user in timeout again. I'll do it one more time.
Arguments, religious arguments. I don't think that does. I think it does a disservice to everybody when we're having this discussion. So I'm just interested in this concept you said of sustainability. Then you mentioned bringing it out and putting it into an incubator. So the potential for human life, we're now saying, is fulfilled as a human life when it can survive outside of the womb. Then you mentioned an incubator, but with technology, for example, now you have babies who can survive earlier.
It cannot survive outside of a host of some point. It's not at a developmental point yet where it can be considered viable apart from some incubator containing it. It doesn't have consciousness yet either. So I would argue those are the best ones.
True.
So does that change the value of the life? Let's say a baby today who's premature who can survive 3 months, 4 months early outside of the womb due to technology as opposed to a baby in the 1940s. Is today's baby's life more valuable just because of our technology?
I don't think it's more valuable.
Wait, who said there's no moral argument as possible here? Did Steven Crowder say that and I missed it? Ooh, this is entirely a moral argument. It's when do you consider it's whether or not you place value on a potential human life, and it's where we consider it to be an actual human life. This is purely philosophical. It's about how you define a human life, and obviously I would define it as a rational human being, a being with consciousness. And before that, it's still potential.
Valuable, but I think it speaks more to a woman's rights, because a lot of people that are pro-life, I understand that. I grew up with fundamentalist Christian mother.
Well, I understand, but let's put that on. No one here is a.
I don't need to. I don't want to go back a few minutes, and I mean you guys heard it. You guys can rewind a few minutes. I want to get through this video, and I gave an explanation of why it's a moral argument, or why it has to be related to morality, because it's how you define a human being. It's a philosophical argument primarily. It's not a scientific argument like these people claim it is.
A fundamentalist Christian.
I'm just saying, in terms of my viewpoints, and they've been very varied in terms of my own upbringing, but at some point that child becomes the reality, and then there's a mother that's involved, and there seems to be a lot of support or a lot of fervor around the pro-life movement, and then not a lot of support about what happens after that point, and putting certain.
Oh my gosh, that's a really dumb argument, but we don't have to get into the whole like, oh, should welfare be a thing? But I mean, they do point out this hypocrisy, like, oh, they're pro-life for these babies, but the second it comes out, they don't care anymore. Well, I mean, you don't really have a duty to support that baby. Nobody. I don't have a duty to support your baby. It's entirely on you to raise that child because you chose. It was a potential being, and you chose to have it. You chose that. You said that I have the resources to handle this implicitly when you choose to have the child. Now you have to take responsibility for that fact. Otherwise, you are basically putting your life in the hands of other people. You're saying that I cannot support my own life. I cannot live for myself, and another human being needs to take responsibility for me. And that is not the human way of living. Humans are individual beings who have to take certain actions to support their individual lives. They can be parasites off of other people, but that's ultimately self-destructive. That leads to very low self-esteems and this feeling of incapability in the face of life.
Women, maybe such as the situation I was in, or other, situations and not giving them the right to choose what happens with their own bodies.
Again, trying to keep this brief. Notice how she has not answered the question at all regarding the value of that life.
Oh yeah, Daniel Krauss says that it's a good argument against conservative. Yeah, that's true. Like the fact that, because they're fundamentally collectivists, that argument of you guys are only pro-life inside the womb, but once it comes out, and then conservatives are like, well, I guess I do care about all human life, and I think it's society's responsibility to focus on that. But it's not. I would argue that it's not society's responsibility, but it is a good argument against conservatives because they fundamentally cannot respond to those type of arguments due to their altruistic premises.
Life born today versus the 1940s, because I was using her own premise of an incubator. And now she's on to supporting the baby after it's born. In other words, free stuff, free healthcare, free college. This is sort of the bumper sticker logic that we move to, and it's important to bring them back to the point.
If you're really pro-life, then
right. If you're really pro-life,
X, Y, and Z.
Free stuff. I try to bring her back here, again, assuming that we can find common ground. Now remember, she's okay with abortion up to 9 months with no restrictions, period. I didn't know this at the time.
And what happens with their
But we've just agreed it's not, right, it's not.
I mean, that's not that terrible of an argument anyways, because, like, it's the same thing. Like, is a house actually a house until that house is built? Once that house is done being constructed? And that's sort of the sort of argument. We're using that house analogy still for why it can't be considered a human being until it's actually out of the mother, actually being being developed.
Your body at that point, if it's a baby in an incubator, right?
Right.
That's a life.
Right.
So we have potential life
movement going
and
to then
life.
take care of that baby in the incubator?
Well, that's not what we're determining right now. What we're talking about is I'm pro-life, meaning I believe that that's a life. So it's first important, I think, if we're going to have a discussion and determine where we disagree, for example, as to where life begins, right?
Okay.
So according to what you just said, it's not life, it's potential life. Mm-hmm. Now, then we talked about technology and sustainability. Right. So would you support abortions up until the moment of birth? Where does the line end then at that point? What makes it okay versus not okay? When is it a life?
That's an interesting question. Personally,
I would argue that it's a human life once it has the faculty of consciousness, which according to my Google search is at 5 months. So that would be my line. That's where I would draw the line personally. I can see the argument for it being, for like the whole like idea of you can't draw that line until like the umbilical cord is cut. I think that's Peikoff's argument as well, because and basically my explanation for that would be that sort of house and blueprint analogy. Like it's not like, think of the DNA as the blueprint, for example, and you're building a house. It's not actually considered a house until the house is completed and the construction workers leave the site. It's the same thing for a baby. The baby is not actually considered a human until it comes out of the womb and is actually actualized from this potential inside the womb.
And I've never been in the position of someone who's had to have one. I find partial birth abortion is grotesque.
You'll see later on, though, she really doesn't, because she doesn't want to put any limitations on them. And this is kind of a hedge, too, personally, but I can't push.
I mean, there is a very common argument that people have where it's like, okay, personally, I don't agree with this, but I don't feel comfortable placing my moral decision on a certain thing on other people. My moral decision on whether a potential human life has value on other people. And that's not a bad argument, because this is fundamentally a moral choice question. It's a question of, do I find value in this potential human being or not? And these things don't have value in and of themselves yet because they're not conscious yet. That would be basically my argument.
On someone else. Well, personally, I find murder wrong, but it's not my position to tell someone else if they can't.
DDV show says the line is once the umbilical cord is cut, it's an actualized human being. See, I understand that argument. However, I think you can. I personally think this is the line that I would draw, that a being, once it becomes conscious, once it has the ability to like perceive reality, that's when it can be considered a human being. Now, and then from a Google search, from the science that I've seen, it seems like that's like 5 months or the end of the second trimester. 5 months isn't the end of the second trimester, obviously, but that's the argument that I've seen that seems to be the best in this context. So I think we might end up disagreeing on this. And here's the thing with abortion, it's a very, very complicated issue, and it's very hard to figure out the line to draw. I don't think Ayn Rand had any particular like statement on that. She just let me actually look. Is it not in the lexicon? Oh, there it is. An embryo has no rights. Rights do not pertain to a potential, only an actual being. A child cannot acquire rights until it's born. Yeah, I think Rand argues that I don't think she ever takes a specific stance on the line. She might personally believe that it comes at birth, but I might disagree with Rand on that particular case.
Can or cannot murder. That's why the
Daniel Krauss says 5 months seems really short. I mean, that's still enough time though. That's still enough time to know that you're pregnant and go abort the baby. Now, if that seems short for consciousness, I would agree. I don't know if that's the right line for consciousness. I'm just going with what it seems the science says on this issue. Now, I don't know if I can trust that science, but with my principles, I have to just make a principle, set a principle, and then say, okay, what does the science say about this? And once the science says a certain thing, I can't look that much deeper into it because I don't have the ability to do so. Now, if somebody were to correct me, explain like, oh no, consciousness begins once the human being is out of the womb. That's an argument I'd be open to as well, because it seems like it might only be able to perceive things once it's outside of the womb as well. Like, Rand said she could be okay with the third trimester as a cutoff point, but she never went deep into this issue. Yeah, I mean I think that's my argument. Like, I don't think that I think once it's in the third trimester, from what I've seen, it seems that the being is conscious. It would be considered a human being at that point, like having a rational faculty. Obviously, it's an undeveloped rational faculty. I want to be clear on that, but it still is the beginning of a rational faculty.
Definition of where life begins, or whether or not it is a life. At this point, she's effectively conceded that it is, matters so much, but some people just don't care anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I know Peikoff was a lot more strict on this. I know that he's hard line. Like, once the umbilical cord is cut, that's when it's a human being. Before that, nope.
To me, that is a viable life. That is unnecessarily destroyed, and I think that there's parents out there that are willing to adopt or whatever, that would be willing to take over if the mother is that desperate in that circumstance. And then my understanding is that happens either after 6 or 7 months of the pregnancy. Typically, when the baby, if it were fully born, would be viable.
Right.
So I think that's kind of maybe.
Okay. I want to make a point here that I'm reading in the chat. Like, okay, I'm okay with if the woman's life is in danger during the third trimester, that it can be aborted for sure, because the woman's life takes priority over the life of the fetus in that context. However, the idea of like, because she gets raped then she can do that doesn't the whole rape argument doesn't make sense. That's not a good argument. Don't make that argument that, like, oh, because she gets raped, then she gets extra privileges in this sense. No, you don't have the right to murder somebody because you were raped. That doesn't quantify in my head. Sure, rape is bad. Obviously, rape is a bad situation. However, that doesn't change the morality of whether the fetus is a potential or is an actual human being or not, or whether or not we should value that life, or which life should be valued over the other. So the rape argument is dumb. Don't make that argument, please.
In terms of when it's a life, when it is
not calling you dumb, by the way, Daniel. I love you, bro.
viable outside of the womb, or outside of, I guess, or within, science or an incubator. But at that point, then I think there needs to be more attention to what's going to happen at that point, because the discussion of when life starts is important, but also then what happens to
It's not extra privileged. Women should consent if she wants to have the baby. Sure, but you don't have the right to kill the baby if it's an actual human being at that point. You still have the ability to not have the baby if you have it, and if you have the first 5 months to do so. Like, you can't use the fact that she got raped to justify murder in that context. If we're saying that it's murder in certain contexts, if the argument is that which is what my argument is here, in general, that's I'm very open to having my mind changed to being like the whole time. But rape is not a justification for third trimester abortions if it's murder.
Before we move on, like to give you an example, right? Because I'm pro-life.
Sure.
So I understand that you want to move on afterwards, and we'll probably get into the idea of a social safety net, healthcare. I understand where you're coming from. But before we get there, right? I'm pro-life. The idea is to change my mind on this, or find where we disagree. Before we move on to another discussion, let's say you're driving home tonight, right? And you see someone in the road, right? And you have plenty. Assuming you're not going to hurt anyone by stopping, pumping the brakes. Do you stop?
If I see someone on the road?
Yeah, to not hit them.
Yes.
I would too. I think we're probably...
Obviously, a fetus is not as valuable. A potential life is not as valuable as an actual life. Don't conflate the two. How disgusting of you to conflate an actual with a potential. This is a quick way to not value human life. This is a quick way to view. If you conflate a potential with an actual, you are very much devaluing an actual human being's worth, to say that it's worth just as much as a non-human potential life, or it is a life obviously, but a potential human life, this clump of cells. These are not equivalents. These are not the same.
Both decent human beings. Now let's say you're same scenario, you're driving home tonight, you're not entirely sure, but you're pretty sure you see someone on the road. Do you stop?
For the most part, yes, unless I see that person with, I don't know, like a chainsaw.
No. I'm just saying, if you're seeing someone crossing the road, you stop, you know it's a person. And let's say you weren't sure it's a person, but you saw someone crossing the road and you could stop. Would you stop?
Typically.
Because you'd err on the side of not ending a life, right?
Typically.
And so that's the discussion.
Yes, but we can say objectively that a potential life is not a life. Just saying that, oh, there's a chance that I might be ending a life here. Sure, don't if you don't want to take that risk, don't take that risk, and it's good to not take that risk because life is valuable. However, if you know that something is not an actual life, if not an actual human life, you can end that life. Like, imagine if Crowder was arguing this imagine if he was arguing this for like cows or plants, for example, just to not piss off the vegans. Let's say he was arguing this for plants. Like, oh, we know that plants, they have the potential to be like, let's say in 1,000 years, we have the ability to like transform the plant's DNA and turn it into a human. Well, we know that this plant could be turned into a human being somehow. So, wouldn't you just want to err on the side of caution? Because in this context, a plant is a potential human life. Wouldn't you just want to err on the caution of not ending a human life? It's not a human life. That's the answer. There you go. I'm giving you this one for free. There you go. That's the answer, friends. It's not a human life.
We're having here is, I haven't heard an answer on it. Perhaps I've missed it. Where does life begin? Because if we don't know entirely, of course, I would say we both agree you have to err in
consciousness. That's where life begins. There you go. No need to err on the side of caution. No need to do any of that. We know that before it's conscious, it's a potential. It's not an actual.
the side of allowing the possibility that that's a life. So where does life begin? I think it's the most important question. We can't move on from that conversation.
Plus, there's another consequence of this ruining an entire woman's life. If you get this wrong, and say that everything's an actual human life, well, then you're forcing women to carry this non-human all the way to term, and force them to have it, and force them to take care of it, and force them to sacrifice their values for this. So maybe we should err on that side of caution, on the side of caution of let's not ruin a human being's life. Let's not force a human being to sacrifice all of their values.
To what happens after birth if we don't agree where life begins.
I don't know.
If a human is a potential corpse, should we bury him in the ground? I mean, I don't see any problem with that logic.
Entirely true, because that's also very important.
It's important, but not if we're killing a life. That's more important than providing it, let's say, with free health care. If we're killing a life, right? So we have to get to that point. Where does life begin? What constitutes a life?
Okay, and then also what constitutes. I've answered a lot of questions, so and I appreciate your empathy regarding my situation and admitting that you'd not been in that circumstance before. What, given my circumstance, do you think would have been a better decision?
Well, again, all of these questions are answered if you can answer the first question, which is the most important question for you to determine your position. What determines a life? Where does life begin?
I have to answer.
What you did there is called argumentum ad baculum. What the fuck is it that? Wait, hold up. Baculum. Oh, come on, man. That was a joke. You know that was a joke. I was not arguing to attack Crowder or bury him in the ground. Like, that's not what I was doing. I was making a joke.
Answered it when it's viable outside the womb.
When it's viable outside the womb. But I don't think that you have answered it that way. So we say, for example, that a baby born in New York City, because of the technological advancements they have to make it viable outside the womb, that's a life, and that exact same baby at that same gestation period is not a life in West Virginia, where it wouldn't be able to be viable outside the womb. What determines viability? What do we mean by viability? Maybe I'm getting confused there.
Its ability to live outside of the womb with the assistance that's available, or because it's matured.
The assistance that's available is a terrible argument. That's not the right argument to make here. You have to, if you're going to argue the viability route, you have to say developmentally viable. You have to say it's at a point of development where it can survive independently from the mother. That's you can't make this like, oh, if things develop, because then you're saying that every single potential life is an actual life, because someday we'll be able to sustain that life apart from a mother. And if it's possible to do so, then it becomes an actual life. No, that's not how you define things. You don't define things by where our point in technology is. You define things by what they actually are. You define things according to their actual identity. And if you're going to go the viability route and say that a human being is an actual human being, if it is at a point in if it's viable, you have to argue that it's at a point in development where it's viable.
To that point within its mother's womb.
One thing you notice, she uses a lot of words like personally, primarily, notably, most likely, to hedge her bets, and she tries to go to the personal scenario. That's why it's so important. She set up me, personal victim, so that she can go back to it when she hasn't answered the question. And if this is where
life is a self-sustaining entity, a fetus is dead. Yeah, I mean that's the viability argument.
It seems like circular logic.
That's the argument that life is a self-sustaining entity. The fetus is dead without the mother. Yeah, then it's once it becomes viable, though, once it can survive apart from the mother, then you can argue that it is an actual life then, because it is a self-sustaining entity at that point. But it has to be at that point in development. It cannot be considered alive. It cannot be a self-sustaining entity if it is if it's like connected to an incubator and forced to not sustain itself on its own.
She claims that she's answered with viability, but she didn't really answer the question of, does a point in time, 1940s versus today, does geographical location determine the value of life? She hasn't answered it. The reason it's starting to get circular, this is why I wanted to show the ending first, is because she doesn't care anyway. She's just trying to, she's just completely unwilling to concede ground. And this is, I should have recognized this here and probably just jumped to the fetal chart. But being a dumbass, I thought I could maybe have a civil conversation and convince her. But I didn't realize, I thought maybe there's a middle ground. I didn't realize her middle ground was 8 months.
8 months.
Okay, but you mentioned an incubator.
Right.
So let's say there's no incubator
I was
within
talking about,
access.
like, Matrix style, like.
Okay, science fiction.
Not science fiction. I mean, I don't think we're too far away from it. I'm just saying that.
No, we're not. It exists right now. I mean, more babies are viable than ever before.
Exactly.
Again, but the viability would.
But are they at a state of development where they can survive apart from developmental assistance? I would argue no.
Be determined by geographical location. So does that determine the value of human life?
I think it does, actually, and it has proven.
Oh, and when I say developmental assistance, I don't mean like food. Every life needs food. Every life needs water. Like when I say developmental assistance, I mean like connected to an incubator and like force fed all this stuff and like forced developed all this stuff, like the way that it's attached to a mother, basically.
Politically, that it has determined life for.
So you would agree with that? You would say a life, for example, in the West Indies is worth less than a North American life in Lenox Hill Hospital? I
think that's the reality of the situation.
So right there, in order to avoid the question, she sort of presents this cynical viewpoint. Well, I think we've seen that, meaning the human rights issues that occur in third world countries, but then tries to sort of shift away from it. So do you believe that? Because the question was, again, where do you believe life begins? And she's saying, well, we've seen that society and technology determines it, and then tries to play the whole, the unfortunately angle. But she's the one who presented it.
I don't necessarily agree with it or think that it's optimal, but I think that that is the reality that we have to deal with. And I think that the reality that I had to deal with was not optimal either, and that I was not given very many other options except for literally sit here and watch it progressively die.
There's that word die again.
Until its last heartbeat, or, try to...
Whose heartbeat?
Yeah, well, the fetus is alive, so obviously it's going to die. And it has a heart, but it's not a human. This is not hard. This is not hard to understand. Things can be alive and not be human beings. Being alive does not necessarily mean that you're a human being. Let's think of all the things that are alive that are not human beings. So let's list off some things. Bacteria, cows, plants, flowers, horses, human fetuses. There you go. All those things are alive, but they're not humans. Now, when I say human fetus, remember, I'm not saying it's a human being. I'm saying it's a potential human. There we go.
Fetus's heartbeat.
The other life's heartbeat.
The fetus's heartbeat at 6 weeks that was not viable, that had gone from 7 cardiac cells to 2.
Right.
Right.
But you were talking about how traumatic it was.
That it would have been traumatic to continue to just go to the obstetrician and watch it die further instead of taking
die. This comes back to the issue. My issue is I'm pro-life, changed my mind. If entertain this.
This is not hard. This is not a hard issue. This is not hard to understand. Things can die and not be humans. Things can die and not be human lives. This is not hard.
Thought for a while, because we talk about viability, right? Well, viability or sustainability, there's a certain level of dependence, obviously, in all stages of development, and certainly after the birth. I mean, most babies would not make it more than half a day after the birth if not for someone else taking care of that baby, right? So we have to determine what viability is, what dependency is. Older people, there are some older people who are entirely dependent, who are entirely non-viable without assistance. I still say that they're a human life. We have people who are in comas who are not viable without people taking care of them. I still say that's a valuable human life. When you get outside of the scientific realm of life, and you've kind of used this term yourself when you talk about another heartbeat dying, ending that life, after conception, right, there's a unique genetic code that determines...
No, Solvent Man, what Crowder is doing here is he's conflating all life. He's conflating the fact that a fetus is alive with the fact that it's human. He's conflating these two. We need to have a clear differentiation between the two. That's what I'm trying to argue here.
Male pattern baldness, to eye color, to sex, to the heartbeat, which is separate from yours immediately. It's the only consistent line to draw to determine what life is.
No, it's not. What about consciousness? What about developmental viability? What about arguing whether it's a human being or not? That's not the only consistent line. Like, there's different lines that I think can be debated, but that's not the only consistent line. Sure, it might be a little vague what specifically that number might be, but from that we can make an argument, okay, this is what the line should be, and go from there.
Outside of that, it's circumstantial. And that's where you end up, as in your boat, valuing certain lives over other lives.
I guess you could say that, but it's kind of like saying...
Some lives are more valuable than other lives. A human being's life is more valuable than a cow's life.
Well, and then this is an oversimplification, obviously, when we're discussing humans, but, a chick hatching, too early, what's the responsibility there? A tadpole, leaving its little egg where it's got its, nutrition, and then, not being viable there. It's not, though, while they are two separate questions, they are completely distinguishable in terms of what the end result is. And so we can talk about when life starts, but there has to be a discussion about viability and healthcare and women's rights intermixed in that. I don't know. I mean, what do you think, for example, a woman that conceives a child as a product of rape? I mean, what do you think, honestly, her option should be?
Well, what I think wouldn't...
It should be the same options as a normal person. Like, it doesn't change the fact. It doesn't change the distinction between an actual and potential human being. The potential human being still doesn't have rights. Its value still comes from what the mother, like what the mother's value judgment of the potential is. It doesn't have consciousness yet. It doesn't have the ability to value itself. Its value entirely comes from the relationship between its mother's consciousness and reality. And for that reason, it obviously doesn't have rights. It doesn't have the right to life at that point.
Change whether that's a life or not, right? Knowledge nor ignorance changes the very nature of something. So it still comes to the question whether that's a life or not. What I think about rape is that rape is terrible. That doesn't change the circumstance that there's a life growing inside of that woman.
Okay, so that woman's life somehow is superseded by...
No, not at all.
But when being forced to carry that child would...
No, I would never force anyone to carry a child.
So then what are the other options?
I mean, you're forcing someone to place value on this potential human being that's not an actual human being yet.
No, I'm not forcing anybody to carry a child. I'm simply barring someone from killing a life.
But you can't have it both ways.
There's no having both ways. I'm not forcing... The rapist has committed an evil act.
Right, but it's been
And so
done.
I'm simply saying that you can't meet an evil act with an even greater evil, which is the termination of a life. I'm not forcing anyone to bear a child. I would never do that.
But how do you say that then conception is where life starts, but you're not gonna... But you would never agree with forcing someone to carry a child if a woman that conceived as a consequence of a rape, that's why she was carrying a child. You would say you would never force that on anyone.
No, of course not.
But that would be that would be her reality. That there would be a life, according to you, growing inside of her that had started, and then what?
For example, right now, if you were to say, I forced you to give...
If you do believe it's an actual human life, though, growing in from conception, then you would obviously force her to carry it to term, in any context. Why? Because if it's an actual human life. If he's right on this, if he's right that it's an actual human life, he is right on these points. You would have to force it because you have to use force to prevent people from using force on other human beings. That's the purpose of government. And if it's an actual human life, you can't kill it. You can't terminate the actual human life. So The issue here, though, is that it's not an actual human life, and therefore does not have the right to life. It would not be an act of force on another human being for the mother to kill it.
Give this interview.
No.
No, but let's say you said it.
Okay.
Would that be true?
No.
So because you say something or because you think something doesn't change the nature of it, correct? So because you say I'm forcing a woman by not allowing her to terminate a life doesn't change the fact that I'm not forcing anyone to carry a life.
By not giving
There was a
her...
crime occurred, and then I just don't believe in meeting evil with an even more evil act.
I understand what you're saying, but by not giving her the option, you are.
Well, not giving her the option, again, of killing a life, of murder is what you're discussing. It doesn't change the nature of it.
By not giving her the option, then you are forcing her to carry a rape child.
No, I'm not.
Then what other option does she have other than to carry it?
Well, it'd be like saying you're being forced, for example, to take care of your child. Because the law says that you have to feed that child, even though it's completely non-viable without your intervention.
You entered into a social contract when you decided to have sexual intercourse with somebody willingly.
Oh no, Crowder's gonna jump on this. You can already see it. Yep, she made a mistake. You're right that you enter into a contract when you choose to have the baby, but you don't do it when you have the intercourse. That's not the case. That's not the case whatsoever. Yeah, she made a mistake in making that argument in particular right there. Yeah, that was a mistake.
I understand one of the consequences of that might be procreation.
See here, she doesn't see the irony in exactly what she says. The consequences might be procreation. Now, we've gotten into the rape discussion, which, it doesn't matter because she's okay with an abortion up to 9 months. So this was more of a philosophical point. I tried to explain that simply ignorance doesn't change the nature of an action. Missed. So a big swing and a miss. So I thought, okay, let's try and bring it back to the vast bulk of abortions. But again, why is she bringing up rape? Why is she bringing up the idea of partial abortion? None of it matters. That's why I thought people need to see the conclusion first. You'll see. Let's get back to...
Yes, force is 100% required to stop someone from having an abortion. Absolutely. Yeah. But if you view the abortion as an act of force, then you can view that force as retaliatory force, which is obviously moral. However, the argument here would be that it is not an act of force to abort a baby because it's not an actual human being at the point before consciousness. That'll be. I'm going to stick with that argument. I'm very iffy on when that line in particular should be drawn, but I do think consciousness is the best line due to the definition of a human being.
Nearly all abortions, which of course aren't from rape.
No, that's not why.
Well,
we're talking about the nature of what life is, right? This is the deep root, which seems that you continually avoid it.
I'm not avoiding it. I'm saying that there are consequences beyond that. But without examining it,
okay. But let's agree on that. Let's say we give you that. Let's say we give you that. Okay. Let's say we give you that. Let's say rape, incest, right? The less than 0.5% of abortions. Let's say we give you this.
Okay.
So then, let's get that off the table. Give it to you. What about the vast majority of abortions, which we both know are committed because of convenience? Would we both find common ground there that's immoral? That's true?
There's nothing wrong with convenience. If you can't afford it, you should not be forced to carry it. Like that's you are the one who chooses, or the woman is the one who chooses whether that potential has any actual value. Because it doesn't have consciousness yet to be able to have values of its own, to be able to value its own life as an end in itself. So the woman is the one who chooses whether or not it has value or not. So yes, it is perfectly fine to do so out of convenience, because if it is something that's going to interfere with your values, if carrying this potential human life to term is something that's going to interfere with your values, then you have every right to abort it. Even just for convenience's sake.
Terminating a life, and that's immoral?
I would say that based on my experience in life and based on things that I've been exposed to, that I think that people should be held to a higher level of responsibility for their actions.
Okay.
And that I do think life is sacred. But...
Oh no. Someone said value is a value in itself. Gold, concrete, diamonds have value even if no one cares about them. That's a major mistake. That's a huge mistake in the comments. Values cannot have value apart from a valuer. What does it mean for something to have value without being valuable to someone, to some consciousness? What does that even mean? What value do they hold? Like I don't know what it means for something to have value in and of itself.
For anyone to go out and judge and say that this person got into this situation because of convenience or irresponsibility is an oversimplification of most of those circumstances. And yes, I do think that there should be, like I said, increased responsibility and more education, but I don't think that should take away the right that the woman has to know in her own situation, in her own abilities, what she's capable of doing and capable of caring for, and the life that will then exist beyond those 9 months for the rest of its life. I don't think that
I'm sorry. I'm trying to see what your answer was there.
Do I think that it's immoral? That was your question.
Yes, to end a life. To end a life when it's let's get rid of rape and incest off the table. So I'm trying to find some common ground here because we both know statistically the vast majority of abortions are not committed.
Okay, I'm going to be honest here. I don't understand why people throw in incest into that. Like, I'm not sure incest, I don't know. Watch Destiny's videos on this. I'm not sure incest is like immoral in and of itself. It's bad if it's pedophilia, obviously. It's bad if it's rape, but it's not something that's inherently force in and of itself. Rape is inherently force. Pedophilia is inherently force. But incest, I don't think incest is inherently force, and it shouldn't be like something that's considered illegal and considered forceful. But that's a whole nother argument. I think a lot of people might like be surprised that I'm making that argument, but I really am not sure. I obviously think incest is disgusting. I think there's a lot of problems, but I don't know if we can say that it's force. I don't get why it's conflated with rape in a lot of these situations.
For that reason. So, if we take the giant bulk, statistically almost all of abortions that are currently being committed in this country, based on convenience or inconvenience, can we find common ground and say, okay, terminating a life, which I think we both agreed upon, is immoral?
Terminating a life in terms of...
No, it's not immoral to terminate a life. You can terminate a cow's life. You can terminate a bacteria's life. Is it immoral to terminate a human life? Yes. There you go.
Like
abortion.
Yeah. Is immoral.
Immoral. To kill another life.
It's not immoral.
To kill a person.
Yep.
To kill a person.
I'm trying to be as very clear in my terms as possible. I know, because you've been somewhat vague.
You're not being very clear, my dude.
I want to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting what you're saying. Yes, to kill another human being is immoral.
To kill another human being is immoral.
Okay.
I want that. I agree with that. But I think that, again, you need to be careful about the definition of when...
Just say a fetus is not a human being. Just say it, please. Please. Oh my gosh, you've been delaying saying that so long. Just say it, please.
That starts, and that because there are so many extenuating circumstances, having actual laws or litigation in this country where I would have had to seek some sort of, I don't know, like waiver or something from my doctor given my personal circumstances is also immoral.
Here's something I found really fascinating right here. She admits that killing a life, killing another human is immoral, but then she says we have to be careful about how we define that life because of circumstances. When has circumstances ever determined science?
Yeah, I know, and that's where I should have...
Well, when a human life begins is not a scientific question. It's a question of how do we define a human life. It's a philosophical question primarily. It's an epistemological question. It's an ethical question. This is not a question of like, oh, let's just look at the science and see what the science says. well, how do you evaluate that science? And how do you evaluate when a human life begins? And how do you define these things? You can't go into science about a human being before you define a human being. This is the issue that the humanities departments make and that the economics departments make. They don't define what a human being is. So then a lot of their science is just based off, they're not basing it on anything. They're not defining what they're studying. Psychology as well. That's a problem with a lot of these fields right now.
Realize at this point, because all of her arguments rest in the circumstantial, which cannot be proven or questioned, and you see that as it progressively.
I mean, context is important because the context is what determines whether or not a woman should or should not value the potential human life. But she has to say that it's a potential human life. She has to say that it's not a actual human being. But she's avoiding that. She's focusing on this context without actually pointing out that it's not a human being. And Crowder is getting her on that.
It gets less pleasant.
It seems that when people, it seems a very common thread when we have these conversations, someone comes in and says, I am this, therefore it's different for me. What I'm trying to do is get on the table here the vast majority of abortions and determine when life begins.
But there are no true circumstances that are the same.
There absolutely are. There absolutely are. Yours is a very...
Oh, she's arguing that there's no principles now. Like this is terrible. She's arguing intrinsicism with subjectivism, basically. Like Steven Crowder's like, oh, intrinsically abortion is always immoral for every circumstance, for every possible way that you could value a potential human life. It's always immoral. That's intrinsicism. But then she's saying that, oh, there's no general principle. There's no general principle about whether or not abortion should be considered legal or illegal. It's just all up to circumstances, which is partially true, but also not true, because you have to be objective in how we define human life. But we also have to be certain to understand that a potential human life, its value is derived from the specific context of the woman. Now, once it's actual, its value is derived from the fact that it is a actual human being, and actual human beings are ends in themselves. They have rights. That's a whole other political argument. Go read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Go read all the essays in Virtue of Selfishness. I think there's 2 that are really good that actually go into politics. I think it's The Nature of Man's Rights. Fuck, let me check. I know they have it at the end of Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. The Nature of Government and what's the other? Man's Rights. The Nature of Government and Man's Rights. Those are the 2 essays that are in The Virtue of Selfishness and also in Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. So if you want to look more into that, go read that stuff. There's a lot of good justifications in there. I'm just trying to give this abortion argument right now.
Very extreme case. Yours is a very extreme case.
It's not actually. I had a very close friend that had the same thing happen to her, but except it happened
statistically
to her 4 months.
Statistically it is. Statistics and these facts matter, and especially when we determine when life begins.
If those laws existed, then she and I would both be in very different boats.
But what if that saves billions of lives? What if that saves hundreds and hundreds of millions of lives? Again, if we need to have a conversation,
they're not lives. Just say they're not lives.
As to where life begins. And if we agree on that, if we don't agree on that, then that determines whether, killing this life or potential life, as someone sees it, is morally acceptable or not. Because maybe in some extenuating circumstances, we would say, okay, in this instance, this is moral for me. But what about the hundreds of millions of lives that have been killed and ended?
Can I ask you a question?
Here's the point where she hasn't answered any of my very framed-in, clearly defined questions, and so she asks me if this is religiously based. Now, let me ask you, have you heard me make any religious argument here?
None.
No. So, Your Honor, I object, but this is what happens.
No.
Is your belief system primarily spiritually based, religious based?
Nothing that I've discussed here has anything to do with that.
No, but I'm asking
Purely
you, where does this...
I don't think that's relevant. I think what's relevant is determining where life begins. Because you haven't answered.
I actually have answered several times.
You've said viability, but it's been remarkably inconsistent.
No,
so,
it hasn't.
Yeah, it has.
No, I've said outside of the womb or outside of scientific.
So the value of life differs from, say, West Virginia or South Africa than the United States. And you support that. You're saying that's okay.
I'm not saying that's okay. I'm saying that's the reality. And I'm saying taking the choice away from women that are in those situations would be a
crime against their lives.
Gosh, I hate to commit, but this is the exact same argument she made earlier. Well, unfortunately, this is the case. This is the reality, right? We see that some babies are valued more than others, as though it's this grave injustice. Yet then she says we must continue to perpetrate this injustice to ensure that this is where, if it seems frustrating watching, believe me, I thought, am I missing this?
Right. So you're not at all concerned with the lives in those cases that you're terminating, that you're killing.
Oh yeah, Diego's right. This is definitely a religious position. You can't believe this without believing in a religious position that life begins at conception, those sort of things. And those you can't philosophically justify them without that whole without reading the Bible. What's the Bible quote? Life at conception, Bible. Where is it? Just give me an actual Bible quote. Oh my gosh, I think it's Jeremiah something. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but there's some quote in the Bible about it.
I'm concerned.
So, and you can't believe it without believing in that quote.
With them, but
not much.
There is a life already that it is in existence, that is in development, that would be adversely affected.
So I want to be very clear here. You just said that's the way it is, so you support the premise that a life is more valuable in Lenox Hill Hospital.
No. You're taking words out of my mouth.
You said that's the way it is.
It's a little bit offensive because as I told you, I have an international relations degree and I've worked for the United Nations and I've worked for the State Department. So I've fought for human rights in people's lives my entire career, my entire education. So you're reducing what I'm saying a little bit. I'm saying that is just the reality of the world.
And you use that to define where life begins, correct? You said viability. That's your... Okay.
Yes.
So the value of human life differentiates based on geographical location according to your premise. That's okay.
Not my premise. The premise that was created by colonial powers, imperialists, whoever you want to say. But that's why there's differences in terms of...
She's not taking any stance behind any moral claim. She's just saying that morality is defined by society. This is the problem with thinking altruistically. It's I'm not saying that this is moral, but society says so. What am I supposed to do about it? I mean, society says this is moral, so that's the moral justification I'll use.
Medical developments and all of those things in different parts of the world, and I've been all over the world, so I know how life is valued in different places, and that is just the reality.
In some places, it's okay to take a sex slave. We would both agree that that's completely morally reprehensible, right?
I would agree with that.
Right. So would we not both agree that geographical location, being born in Lenox Hill Hospital, shouldn't make your life more valuable than someone who's born, let's say, in the plains of Zimbabwe who doesn't have an incubator?
I completely agree with you, but I also agree that the reality of the situation is that there's always been a difference in terms of prices on human life. Our country has a really great history.
And you support that, then?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
Again,
then it comes back to where does life begin? But where does life begin then? Because you just said that's the reality.
It is the
If
reality.
you fight for human rights, what about that basic human right? Again, the right to
Whose
life.
human right?
The right of that child, the right of that baby to be just as valuable in Sudan as it is in Manhattan.
What rights has it been able to? What rights as a fetus does it
as a baby
have? Fetus? Is that a baby?
As a baby. Depending on where it's born, it can be a baby, a viable baby, or it can be aborted. Yeah, depending, or it can be something that's just a death. But that's entirely dependent on where it's born.
Right, but that's the reality of the circumstance.
You see that long, uncomfortable pause there.
Oh my gosh.
The left
She's so bad at arguing this point. This is the person that I'm defending right now. Why am I defending this person? I'm defending her positions, not her. There we go. I'm attacking her as well. I think the people who defend the ideas that... This is actually an important principle. The people who defend my ideas, the people who defend the ideas that I'm fighting for, capitalism, freedom, all these sort of things, they're terrible at defending them. Absolutely terrible. I mean, it's mostly because of altruistic premises, bad morality, those sort of things. But this just goes to show that point. This just goes to show that the people who are defending the principles that we hold, they're terrible at this. This is why you need Rand. This is why we need a strong moral system of selfishness. Because I don't know. Maybe it's also due to the fact that Crowder just dunks on people off the street, basically. He doesn't actually argue with real intellectuals. He doesn't actually argue with good debaters. He just dunks on people he finds on the street. So that's part of it as well. But let's keep going.
So you used to using this umbrella term as though it just makes it go away. She's used the word repeatedly: dying, cardiac cells, ending, death. But it's all...
A fetus is a life. A fetus is a life, my dude. A fetus is something that is alive. A fetus is alive. A fetus can die. A fetus is a life. All right? Is that clear? That's clear, right? I agree with that. There we go. Is it a human life? Can you defend that? Can you defend that point that it's a human life? I don't think you can, Crowder. Debate me. Crowder, Steven Crowder, I challenge you at this moment to a debate with me. Oh, he's not going to see this video, but wouldn't it be a pleasure if he did?
Okay, if you just say it's not, I say it's not a baby, it's a fetus.
Someday, I hope, I pray for one day. I pray on my knees to our good Savior, our good Lord, Ayn Rand, that one day Steven Crowder sets up a Change My Mind at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Oh, what an incredible day. What a beautiful day that will be when Steven Crowder sets up a booth at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. And then I waltz over to his booth, sit down and say, Crowder, let's debate. And then I sit down, look him in the eyes, and tell him, I love you. And a fetus is not a life.
At this point, even though we're discussing a viable baby, depending on where it's born, but say fetus, and all that goes away.
Taking that away from a woman who's in those more difficult places, who doesn't have those medical advances.
But do you understand how it's an inconsistent? My point is your viability line is very...
Also, I should have said a fetus is not a human life. I made a mistake there. I made a mistake in my grandstanding, but it was still beautiful. It was still beautiful while it lasted.
Very inconsistent. It's not a consistent measurement. You're ending a human life with its own DNA.
It's not inconsistent. I've always maintained viability.
Ooh, you're tearing up the blueprint. Why would you destroy that house? Tear up that Why would you destroy the house? What the fuck? Oh my god, you're destroying a whole house by tearing up that blueprint.
And I maintain that there just are geopolitical differences in terms of scientific advancements and in terms of availability. And that's just the reality. And if pro-lifers are going to go around the world and donate billions and billions and trillions of dollars to hospitals...
They do. Far more than the UN. They do far more charitable work than the UN.
The fuck was that conversation with security about? Why did he include that? He didn't even say anything about it.
Okay.
Yeah, statistically. You know this if you fought for human rights.
That's a conversation.
Okay, it's a different conversation.
It depends on where you are, but I'm just saying that's been a sad reality, and perhaps with more support and perhaps with more education that wouldn't be the case, and that I do think that
support education. I don't understand. Okay, let's remove different countries because maybe that's sort of the barrier here. Let's just go to state borders. Let's say a baby right now, 6 months old. Okay, 6 months old, Lenox Hill Hospital, completely viable, right? Best medical technology available. Okay. Same exact baby. Okay, Hills of Tennessee, born the same time. One lives, one doesn't. All right. So does that make it acceptable or one life less valuable to abort at that term in a pregnancy? Where is it okay? When is it okay to abort? Because we've now determined that viability can vary.
Right.
So, at that point, we would say abortion.
Developmental viability cannot vary, though. There is always a point that is the same no matter where you are, where that fetus can survive apart from the mother. It is at a point in development where it can do so. Now, it can survive. However, is it at a point in development where it can do so independent of the incubator? That is the important question here.
It's not acceptable because it could be viable outside the woman you are.
The point we were making was
you mentioned viability. You said viability.
No, we were talking about when does life begin.
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said viability.
Right.
So that is determined by where they could be born or when they could be born, right? There are a lot of different circumstances.
Right.
So do those different circumstances determine the actual value, the essence of human life? Is that your presupposition?
If you want to talk about the value of human life in terms of like an overarching definition, no.
So here we go. This is where I should have just brought out the fetal chart. She says if you want to talk about the overall idea of the value of life, no, but the reality, yes. In other words, she's saying that yes, value is determined by technology, by your access to doctors, to your healthcare provider. That determines whether you are a human or not. And that's why the conclusion was so.
What does he mean by just bring out the fetal chart? Like, is this like the game changer argument? Oh man, I want to see this fetal chart.
Important, because now you see why
does he bring it out?
Just non-stop circular logic makes sense from her position.
If you want to talk about the reality, then yes.
Okay. So the reality is, even though that
there's a weird dichotomy between morality and practicality here. It seems like there's a philosopher who's solved that error before and still is pro-choice. I wonder who that could be.
Baby is viable, as you've just agreed, you'd be okay with aborting.
Maybe Crowder should debate somebody who resolves this practicality and morality dichotomy and is still pro-choice. That would be an interesting argument to see. I wonder if there's anybody out there who does that, who makes those sort of arguments. Whatever. It is what it is.
If it's in a place where it wouldn't be able to be put on support.
I said that I believe that life begins at viability. I said that unfortunately, and based on experience, whether you want to if you want to take other countries out of it, then that's fine, even though that's the majority of the world's population. Then
I didn't, because you said geopolitically. So go ahead and put it back in. Put it back in.
That's fine.
Put it back in for your argument. Put it back in.
No, it's fine.
Put it right back in there.
I don't need to. I'm just saying that viability is one thing, life is another, and yes, lives have always had different values in different places.
Viability is one thing, life is another, but you just said that viability is what determines a life.
I said that in terms of, you said would abortion be okay where there weren't the scientific advancements available in one place versus the other. And I didn't.
I was asking, is the value of the life determined by that technology or by the era in which the baby is born?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. So to you, that's what determines the value of human life?
Not to me. To the rest of the
world.
I'm
asking you, what is your opinion then? Convince me, because my opinion is there's no consistent line. I'm trying to be as clear in terms as possible. There's a unique human genetic code created at conception. You mentioned a heartbeat. That's not your heartbeat. It's not the father's heartbeat.
Right.
You don't have, when you were when you were carrying your lovely daughter there,
Is a human defined by his heartbeat? Is someone a human being because they have a heart that beats? I don't think so. I don't think that is the defining feature of a human being. Dogs have hearts that beat. Cows have hearts that beat. So can we define a human being as the animal with a heart that beats? I don't know. What's the difference between a human being and every other animal? This is a hard one. Maybe rationality? Maybe the rational faculty? I don't know any cows with a rational faculty. I don't know any dogs with a rational faculty. I don't know any plants with a rational faculty. So maybe the defining feature should be the rational faculty, or the human consciousness, which the human consciousness is unique in the fact that it has a rational faculty.
You didn't have 4 feet. You didn't have 4 hands. You had a separate life living inside of you. Mm-hmm. My contention is, of course, that scientifically that life we see begins at conception. DNA is created. You said viability, and then I was just showcasing how viability is determined by geography, by different points in history, and then you said, I don't support it, but that's the way it is. So I'm asking you, where is your line as to where life begins?
My line is at viability.
And this is like we talking about before, this is where that kind of cross section occurs, where far right and far left meet, where culture determines.
Yeah, your value
morality.
and morality, it comes from your immediate culture.
Right, not science.
There is no
not
ultimate
any
truth.
intrinsic
There is
value.
not, no.
It is remarkable.
He said it. He said intrinsic value. He said it. There it is, guys. He said intrinsic value. Guess what? Intrinsic value doesn't exist, my dude. There can be no values apart from a valuer. Ha! Got him.
But again, when you don't care if it's a 9-month-old baby, all of this makes sense. If that isn't your position, almost none of this makes sense. It's certainly
More
completely
smokescreen.
Inconsistent. Yeah, all a smokescreen.
Do I support the differences and different places where viability begins? No. But until we have more equality as far as that is concerned, I don't believe in taking the right away from women to make certain decisions.
So you've just acknowledged, I just want to be clear, that a viable life, because of its geographic location, you are okay with killing.
I'm not okay. I'm saying that's the reality of the situation.
So you are against it, but it's the reality of the situation.
I'm saying that I wish that mother could get more support and education. But
that wouldn't change viability at that point. There's a life growing inside of you. This baby is 6 months, let's say 5 months, let's say 7 months. If the mom could have a PhD, it doesn't change the fact that if that baby's born premature, it won't survive in this area of West Virginia compared to Manhattan. It doesn't change anything. But you're okay with aborting, let's say, at that point.
Notice there's no response there. The left is so used to going completely unquestioned, where their solution for everything is
the left. This is how these right wingers define the left. I'm no fan of the left, but if you're going to attack the left, at least attack leftists who are coherent, like Crowder. Debate Sam Cedar on this issue. Debate like Richard Wolff or Vosh or Destiny or any other leftist who is willing to debate and actually should be the people that define the left. Like when we think about right wingers, we don't look at the craziest right wing protesters that you can imagine or the most crazy Trump supporters that you can think of. That's not how you define the right. You define the right by the most intelligent advocates of right wing ideology. Like this dude's like, oh, the left, because this woman said this. This is what the left does. No, look at the people who are like the dominant leftists. Like, go debate like Sam Cedar or something like that. Now, I don't like the left, by the way. Just being very clear. Not a big fan of the left. I respond to leftists quite a bit as well. But Crowder, man, this is not how you argue with your opposition. You don't argue against the weakest advocates of a position. I mean, this is one of the most valuable aspects of debate, is arguing with the most strong advocates of another position, because you know that you can actually refute that position, that you're not strawmanning the other side.
More education, more healthcare, more support, more funding.
Translation?
For
money.
Even though it doesn't change anything. And in this sense, that's why she doesn't respond to it, because it's the first time I think this kind of a premise has gone questioned with her.
I think it's situational. What I'm not okay with is taking away a woman's right to make certain decisions about her body, and I think that's...
But that's not her body, right? We both established that.
But it is, though.
But it's not. It's not if it lives in New York and it doesn't live in West Virginia. You're just saying, again, okay, here I'm against it because it can live in a hospital on the Upper East Side, but here I'm not.
I'm saying that that's...
It's not...
I wouldn't necessarily... I don't know. The question of is it part of her body or not is an interesting question. I don't know if it's necessarily part of her body. Now, it's not individuated from her. It relies on her body. But, it's definitely the case that it's not a human life yet. But the argument of whether it's part of her body or not is an interesting argument, because it's connected, obviously, by the umbilical cord. But it's also like a kind of a separate organism, I would argue. I would say that it makes sense to say that it's a separate organism. However, that doesn't change the fact that it's not a human life. It's a potential human life. It's something living, but it's still in a potential form when it comes to defining it as a human.
Her body
is that those differences exist. Scientific advancements, those differences exist.
I completely agree.
Support, all of that, those things exist.
Mm-hmm.
And until we get some more even ground on that, I think it's...
But does that change the essence of personhood? Does science change the value of life? Does science change?
I would agree with Crowder. Science, development, or advancement does not change how you define terms. Terms need to be defined, now necessarily in a context, in a specific human context, but when you're defining what a human being is, it has to be valid across all these different technological developments. Otherwise, you have these different concepts of human that are developing with different essences, with different definitions. And if you can't unite all of them, you don't have a united concept of human being. So this woman needs to take an epistemology course.
The essence of what a human being is.
I think it's proven that it has. I mean, we could go way off topic and talk about human growth hormone or steroids or science. Yes, it does.
That doesn't determine a life.
Yes, it does. It changes the essence of the life. It changes the quality of that.
What is personhood? What makes a human being, I guess, is a question. What makes a human being? What determines a human life? And that's just, I feel like we're getting hung up there because I'm just not seeing a very consistent rationale in applying your standard here. It seems like we're going in circles.
If it seems inconsistent, it's because I think it's a dangerous segue into removing rights that shouldn't be removed because there are unique situations and because there are these.
Rights need to be consistent, though. You can't define rights in an inconsistent way so it applies to some humans in weird contexts and not in other. Like, rights need to be something that's objectively defined. Because if you don't have objectively defined rights and it's just purely whimsical, what sort of society are you going to live in? You're going to live in a society where rights are just completely arbitrary, where the government can come in and just take away your rights in any time because there's no actual basis for them. Or, oh, in this context, it would serve society better if you didn't have rights. There's Rucka's analogy that he used in one of his videos that I liked. When it was talking about rights, like, oh, why can't I violate your rights a little bit? Or like he used it with this idea of it was putting your head in someone's butthole. Why can't I put my penis head in your butthole? I'll just put it in the head. No, obviously not. No, don't do that. But it'll be just the tip, please. It's gonna lower crime rates if I violate your rights. It's gonna have a better impact on society. I mean, what if it did all of these things? What if it had all these benefits on society? Still, you can't put your head in my butthole. You can't put your dickhead in my butthole. Not even the tip. Not even just the tip.
Differences, and because there are a lack of resources,
and this is why rights can't be arbitrary. Rights need to be objectively defined, so that it's not, you can't even just do this little tiny violation of the rights where it's infinitesimal. No, it's still a violation of rights. The rights need to be objective, non-arbitrary, non-whimsical. They need to be what they are. A is A. There we go.
Because there is a lack of education, and saying that, well, this is where life begins, then you're automatically getting into the discussion about murder, and I don't think that that's appropriate.
Why isn't that appropriate? If life has begun, and you're ending that life.
Because again, it's about viability, and we have just had a discussion about how that's different in different places, and how life is valued differently in different
places. Right, but in my point is that with my position, killing that life is very consistent. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. It doesn't matter whether it would live in New York and not in the Sudan. It doesn't matter whether it would live in West Virginia and not in a hospital in Tennessee. None of that matters in my instance because I'm concerned with the rights of that life. And we both agree that in some instances, that life may be viable. It may not be viable.
Over the rights of the person carrying it.
No, not over the rights of the person carrying it. I'm simply not allowing the killing of one life.
It is violating those rights, though, because essentially it is a potential life, and you're forcing that woman to say that this life has value. And to force someone to value a certain thing is to violate their rights. It is to use force on them. So it is a violation of rights.
Allowing the killing of one life is not forcing, one that you've acknowledged is viable, is not forcing somebody to do anything.
Yes, it is.
What's important here is we're both discussing a life at this point that we've both agreed is viable outside of the womb.
She wants to go back and forth based on convenience for her argument.
That's why this is so disturbing. We've both agreed that we're discussing a life viable outside the womb, and she still doesn't care. And this is where it snowballs pretty quickly.
Forcing someone to carry a baby to whatever term, especially in extenuating circumstances or where the lack of resources that it is not realistically viable once it gets outside of the womb. So
Okay.
I think that, you know,
So when would it be okay, I guess, to put limitations, let's say on abortion?
limitations.
When is it okay? Because we've acknowledged viability is not consistent, but you're okay with it anyway.
5 months. Wait, hold up. Let me keep playing it so we can do it.
You're the only one who's valuing the rights of one being over
5
another
months.
being, the mother
There you
over
go.
a child. Because you're the one who's actually proactively terminating a life, and you're okay with that. I'm simply saying no one has the right to terminate another life, just like you don't have, it's the non-aggression principle. You don't have the right to hurt me, I don't have the right to hurt you.
The non-aggression principle. He said it, guys. The non-aggression principle. The a priori intrinsicist, rationalistic axiom of the libertarians. Completely baseless. Why can't you aggress on somebody? Why? Because non-aggression. Because aggression bad. But why? Non-aggression. But why? Non-aggression principle. You cannot use force. But why? Explain it. And they can't do it. They can't do it. They take it axiomatically because they don't understand the nature of man. They don't understand that. Now, obviously, you shouldn't aggress on somebody. I agree with the principle to an extent. Libertarians have a way of applying it that's very bad. When it comes to contexts like war, for example, they become pacifists. When it comes to contexts like intellectual property, they become stupid. But there's this misunderstanding of this non-aggression principle. You need to have a non-aggression principle or eliminate force from society, because to live, a human needs to make his own judgments and act on his judgments and keep the rewards of his actions. And because of that, if we value life, if we value the fact that a human has the right to life, if we say that a human being can, needs to be free to live, if we say that a human being has to pursue his own life, or he ought to be able to pursue his own life, then all the other rights follow from there. And you can't use force to violate that right. You can't use force to tell a human being that he can't pursue his life. He can't make his own judgments about how to live.
I'm saying that person doesn't have the right to hurt that baby. You're saying it does.
You can't use force unless it's pedophilia or selling drugs to children. Who's getting punched in the face in either of those scenarios? If you can't show me somebody getting punched in the face, it's not force.
So you're saying her rights supersede that of the other life living, growing inside of her. So at what point is that okay or not okay, I guess, is where it comes down to. At what point is it okay to violate the non-aggression principle and terminate another life?
Again, I had made my statement pretty clear on partial birth abortions. I personally find them abhorrent. I know of one particular situation that was, whatever. But, maybe...
You can terminate a life when it's of value for you to terminate that life. Now, it's not of value for you to terminate a human life, but it is of value for you to terminate a potential human life, because that potential human life is not an actual human being yet, and because of that, you can terminate that life. Oh man, how many times do I have to say this? Why doesn't Crowder hear me? I keep giving him the answer, but he doesn't hear me. Crowder, listen to me.
An argument can be made, but still. I think that's where the education needs to come in. I think that, and I think you're maybe diminishing a little bit the fact that it's not an easy decision for the mother. It's not optimal. It's not something that any woman actually that I've ever spoken to wants to do.
Obviously, it's a hard decision about whether to value a potential life or not. Deciding whether to value a certain thing is a difficult decision, especially when it's as important as a potential human life. Because this has the potential to be a human being that you raise and gain all the satisfaction from developing that human child. but it also has the potential to be something that destroys your life, destroys all of your values. And when you realize that this thing is not actually a value to me, that this potential human life is not a value, and I need to terminate this. And that's a tough decision, because you can see that people are happy when they allow this potential human life to flourish and to grow into a human being. However, they still have time. You still have time as a woman.
Great stream, my dude. Thanks for all the content you provide.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. That's the homie. That's the homie, Daniel. Love you, bro. Thanks for the $1.
I don't, again, I think because of the amazing amount of circumstances that a woman can experience and endure, that it's dangerous to put any kind of limitations or controls around that, because she in the end is the one responsible for that. And
that's very true. That's a good point. She's bad at defining that it's actually not a human life, but since it's not a human life, it's the woman who gets to decide whether it has value or not, because the fetus can't value yet. It's not conscious.
And those circumstances, and I don't think that it's entirely fair to judge them without being in her shoes. I'm not sure what people felt about the decision that I made, but
that doesn't change the essence of what is moral, what is a life. It's like saying, well, listen, I'm against slavery. I think it's bad. But if someone else makes that decision, I have no right to judge their right to choose slavery. Because at one point that was considered okay, right? Someone's opinion on an issue doesn't change what it is. It doesn't matter what our opinion is on gravity. It doesn't matter what our opinion is on slavery if it's immoral.
Ha! Facts don't care about your feelings. Got 'em.
Indentured servitude, that's immoral. It doesn't matter what our opinion is if that's a life. And that's why it's the only question, I would say, that really needs to be answered before we have any other discussion.
But wait, Crowder, don't you just feel that this is a human life? But how do you know it's a human life? It's just a potential. It's not conscious yet. It's not a human being yet. Oh, I really feel like this blueprint's a house, though. God told me that this blueprint's a house, so we can't tear apart the blueprint, because that would be destroying a house, and we know destroying a house is intrinsically bad.
So at 2 weeks, 3 weeks, not even observable other than under a microscope at the moment of conception, that's where a woman loses all ability to make any decisions for...
No. You act as though I'm anti-choice. That's not true.
Well, how can you be pro-life and pro-choice?
Sure. I support 4 choices.
Okay.
Contraception, abstinence, motherhood, adoption.
Okay.
Contraception. Sure, contraception is good. Use birth control. What's the second one? Contraception, abstinence. Ooh, tell someone you can't have sex. That's a good one. Good one, man. Because we all know sex is immoral. Sex is evil. The greatest pleasure that a human being can achieve in life, or one of the greatest pleasures, I would say, that's immoral. Wait, why is that immoral? That's a very Christian argument. It seems like you're smuggling in God into there. And we see with this justification what these people's real motive is. They are not pro-sex. They're very opposed to sex. This goes back to that Nick Fuentes video we were watching earlier with his very anti-pleasure arguments that he was making. These conservatives are very anti-sex. They're like, just don't have sex. If you don't want to have an abortion, don't have sex. Sacrifice your life. Sacrifice the pleasure that you can achieve during life. Abstain from sex. Wait till marriage. And that's disgusting. People should and ought to have sex, because that is a pleasurable experience. That is a experience that brings quite a bit of pride and happiness to a human being. I think that he said the third choice was motherhood. That's not an option for some people. Some people cannot afford that child. It's immoral to say that. To say that they have to value this potential human life, because God said so, basically, because God says that a human being is a human being at conception. Once it has its blueprint ready for the house to be built. And then adoption was the last one. Rice Powell says it right. How many babies have you adopted, Crowder? Adoption is not the best option for a lot of these children. You can force the woman to carry it to term. That's terrible. You still have to force the woman to carry it to term, to go to the doctor, have that child taken out of her body, and then you send the child to adoption, and that's it's gonna be a terrible life for that child, and it's not necessarily the best thing for the woman to do either. You don't have to go through all of this extra work of letting the child come out, and then giving it to the adoption clinic and forcing that child to have a terrible life. When the child didn't even have to be born to begin with, the child didn't even have to exist, and it was never a human life when it was still in that potential phase.
The only one I have a problem with is the fifth one. That's murder.
Murder.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I said Rice? Rise Powell? I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. I apologize. Please don't unsubscribe. Please stay.
So you don't even use the word abortion. You just use the word murder.
Okay, killing. What is killing? Let's define. What is killing? What's the definition of killing?
Killing would be the cessation of...
The forcible cessation of someone else's life, right?
Murder or killing.
Well, let's. I'm trying to see.
I can kill the tree, but I mean.
Okay, killing as it would relate to a person. Would it be the forcible termination of someone else's life? Killing.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Now, what is murder?
Murder would be an aggressive, typically premeditated act to. It's the cessation of a formed life.
It's killing with intent, right?
Well,
to simplify.
Murder is, otherwise it's manslaughter or whatever
sure.
else.
Okay.
Well, murder would just be the aggressive version of killing. Killing is okay sometimes. Murder would just be like the aggressive version of that. So the word aggressive was good there. It's the initiation of force, basically. It's killing as an initiatory act of force. Murder, I wouldn't call self-defense killing murder. That's not how I would define murder, but we can have all sorts of definition of these things.
So we agree on murder. So if that's a life, how is abortion not murder?
Because again, at different points, it's not.
Oh, your name's pronounced Reese. That's interesting. Reese Powell. Well, thank you for your comment.
It's not viable. It's a consistent pattern that we see throughout nature when things aren't viable, when a mother doesn't have proper resources, that she takes care of it because of knowing what the experience will be of that child and of her family and her ability ever to starve to death on a ice floe or whatever. I mean, it's a pretty consistent.
Let me answer your question with as much specificity as I can. You said, yes, I believe that once that unique human DNA is created that's separate from the mother, separate from the father, to an entirely new person, yeah, I don't support the forcible termination. So that's my view, to be, just so I'm very consistent. So let's look at the fetal development. Where is it okay for you? What?
Got her. He pulled out the fetal development chart. This is what we've been waiting for. This is the climax. There we go. Look at that.
At what point is it okay to kill?
That's an interesting question because you're usually kill and.
Where's 5 weeks? Somewhere around here. Or no, 5 months. Sorry, somewhere around there because it's not conscious before that. Is this baby conscious? No. Is that conscious? Is that conscious? None of these are conscious up until somewhere around here. I'm not sure specifically where that 5 week mark is, but it's somewhere around here.
Murder. I don't.
Just because it might look like a baby or might make you feel bad about it, doesn't mean it's actually a baby. It doesn't mean it's actually a human. So some of these might look like humans, but they're not humans yet. They're not conscious.
Let's remove murder and kill. Let's assume that the abortion is accidental, so it's not murder.
Again, I don't believe in putting these.
At what point is it? I've said unique DNA. It's separate from the mother and father. At that point, the only consistent line, of course, in comparison to viability, is sustainability. Here.
Oh, an interesting thing here is consciousness. Saying that it's conscious, saying that it has a faculty of reason, does not mean that the consciousness is active every single moment. That's important Because just because something's asleep doesn't mean it's not a human anymore. Just because something's in a coma doesn't mean it's not a human anymore. It still has, but in these cases, it still has a faculty of reason, a consciousness that has the faculty of reason. So even in those cases, because I know Ben Shapiro makes this argument a lot, that like, oh, you're going to use the consciousness argument. Well, what if the person's in a coma? What if they're unconscious? Well, they still have the faculty of consciousness. They still have a faculty of reason developed in them. So that's an important point I want to get in here, right at this point, because we're talking about consciousness again. So I'd say somewhere around here actually would be a good point.
You sounded like a question mark.
Well,
You're not sure.
I don't know. It's his ovulation period, so I'm trying to see where the actual conception is taken care of is taking place according to what you put in front of me.
Yes. Okay. So that's conception, week 1.
Okay.
So where is it okay to? Where on this chart is it morally okay to kill?
Okay. Morally okay to kill again is a difficult question, and it's putting me into a box.
Okay, where is it morally okay to terminate a pregnancy? Let's use that term. I'm just trying to, because I've answered the question, I hope, as clearly as I can, conception. So I just would like to see it pick on the scale. Maybe that'll determine where we disagree.
It's not, because I'm looking at pictures of developing babies and I can see their characteristics forming on their fingers and their toes, and I understand what is going on, and I had a very difficult pregnancy with my daughter, so I went into the doctor 2 or 3 times a week, so I know exactly what happens at every point. Again, I think it's very dangerous to put these...
He's doing the emotional thing. He's doing the thing where he like shows all these pictures of babies and like, you want to kill that baby? Look at that baby. Don't you feel bad that one would die? Isn't that so clearly a baby? He's doing the emotional thing. Conservatives are feels over reals people. These are not the facts over feelings people that Ben Shapiro makes them out to be. This is how people argue abortion. When Peikoff went in to argue with an abortionist or an anti-abortion person, with a pro-life person, he specifically asked, don't show any pictures. We're not going to argue on feelings here. We're not going to appeal to the emotions of the audience. We're trying to actually argue abortion here. The dude refused. He had to show the babies. He had to appeal to the emotions of his audience. Because naturally, we like babies. We're drawn to babies. We're like, oh, that baby's so cute. You want to kill that baby? Oh my God. And that's terrible. That's terrible. Reese Powell says, I think the consciousness argument works better than the argument that the fetus relies on the mother, because there are people who rely on other people for life, but they still have consciousness. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about abortion, and I think consciousness is a better line to draw than that, because I used to do the developmental viability thing, the viability argument, and I think that's Charles Two's method of arguing for it as well. But if you look, actually, I think it's my second video I argue about abortion, and I use the developmental viability argument. But I think consciousness is a better argument at this point, just due to the way that humans are defined, how we define a human being. Now, there's also the Peikoff method, where it's the umbilical cord, once it's actually out, like the whole idea of once the house is built, going back to my blueprint house analogy, once the house is built, that's when it's a house. But that might not be the best definition either, because if the house can stand, if the house fits all the characteristics of a house, I would say that it is a house. If it fits the definition of a house, it's a house. And a human being that has consciousness, that has a rational faculty, it fits the definition of a human being. It's rational. So I would say that would be the best definition of when we can say it's a human being.
These very specific lines and say, okay, for this woman X, this is the point. For this woman Y, this is the point. I don't agree with putting those distinctions, because we don't know what's...
Where is it okay?
Oh, and for the thing where Peikoff talks about the way that abortionists use pictures, I think it's called a picture is not an argument. It's that lecture.
We don't know if she's in Virginia.
To end this life.
We don't know if she's in New York. We don't know if she's been raped. We don't know what the circumstances are. Being a person that's suffered, has PTSD myself, the trauma of a rape or whenever she's able to actually take care of it, that's a separate question.
That's irrelevant. Where is it okay to kill that life?
It's not irrelevant. I'm saying it's dangerous to put those...
He really wants her to tell him which babies are okay to kill. He really wants that, because he knows that the second she points at that, all the babies that are on the left side of her hand, he will say, you really want to kill those babies? And that, when she does that, he got her locked in. And then there you go. I want to look at the comments after this as well.
Parameters on
But they do exist. They do exist. The parameters exist whether you like them or not, or I like them or not.
Parameters exist, but
there are laws.
Still legal.
There are laws. Exactly. There are legal avenues. There are laws. So.
Oh, Reese Powell, that's a good argument. I don't think someone would argue that Stephen Hawking isn't a human being because he relies on another human being to feed him. He's still a conscious being. Yes, he still has the faculty of reason. He still has consciousness. So that's a good argument. That's good. I think that's going to be the way that I approach abortion from now on. I go back and forth on abortion a lot because that's a really hard issue to define. I actually used to be like full pro-life. Like I grew up Catholic. Like this was the one issue that I was very certain on. And then over time, like I've sort of changed my opinion. I switched to the developmental viability model of drawing that line. And then I'm going to switch to that whole view of consciousness being the defining characteristic.
I'm asking your opinion. Where should the law be? Where is it okay?
I don't think there should be one. I think that there are unique situations. I don't think that we should be mandating women's rights that way.
So nowhere here should there be any law.
No, I don't think there should be a law.
Although the developmental viability is not a terrible argument either, because it's still getting to a point where it's developed to a certain point where you would consider it a separate human being. So that the essence of that argument isn't terrible, but we still have to define where is that point in development where it's considered a human being, where it's considered a separate human, a viable human. And I would say that's consciousness.
There shouldn't be any law that you can't
Based on
kill.
How I feel about it morally does not change what her personal experience is, and
it doesn't change what this is. It doesn't change what these things are. You're looking right now at
but
people.
But you're supposing that, and I have a real woman standing in front of me telling what's really going on.
But this is real. This happened millions, many millions. I mean, you're talking about each week. That's real. So why is it? At what point is it okay to? You asked me. I said conception. This is where DNA is created. Mm-hmm. It's entirely different. Mm-hmm. You talked about heartbeat, obviously unique from the mother and father. I've given you a clear answer.
And I've given you clearance.
You haven't. You said you don't believe in any limitations at all.
I think that there are situations that are so unique that to put laws on them would be a travesty and would be a punishment for certain women.
Okay. Well. The fact that you're okay terminating this,
I told you already,
doesn't change my mind.
Partial birth abortion to be.
Well, then just pick the chart. Point.
Oh, he got it. He got the final point. It doesn't change my mind. I'm sorry. You tried. You didn't change my mind. He wasn't gonna get his mind changed. Spoiler alert, guys. His mind's not gonna be changed by setting up a booth in the middle of the street, in the middle of some plaza where people just walk up with no idea about these issues, who haven't thought as much about these issues. Spoiler alert, his mind's not going to get changed by those people. He's pretty set on his beliefs on this particular issue.
Tell me where partial birth abortion. Tell me where it's okay.
I told you.
Pick a baby and point, and that's an answer.
I personally find it extremely repugnant and distasteful, but I know of a specific circumstance where, I can't be the judge of that. And I think that it's, again, dangerous to start this discourse without having other things like the education and blending in place, because when you start
how is this not education? Right here, this tells you exactly what kind of development, where the baby is at each week. Is that not
what it looks like? It's giving you a picture. A picture is not an argument, Stephen. Not an argument.
Education. Right now you have the.
I know you love Stefan Molyneux. You've had him on your show a few times. I think I remember Stefan being on Stephen's show, but. I know you know who Stefan is, and guess what? If you were talking with you, he would say, "This is not an argument, Stephen. Not an argument." Also, look at all those eggs. We're not running out of those anytime soon.
The education of what that fetus, zygote, fetus, baby, to use your terms, is, couldn't possibly be more informative.
No, until we have more education that's honest in this country about how contraception works. More responsible mentoring programs in terms of relationships and how,
Oh, she's dodging so hard. She's been doing this the whole interview. She can't make these arguments. It's terrible. She's just sort of complexity signaling, basically. She's just saying, oh, this is complex, so we can't really say blah, 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 blah. Have some principles, please. We need principles.
conception works, until there's a support network that's in place for these women that would have made other decisions. But as you say, you support adoption, and that's a clearer, less, guilted, morally repugnant path where a woman has to hang her head for 9 months and then painfully give away. Until those things have changed, I think it's dangerous to set these precedents and make these laws, because we don't have the support mechanisms in place for the after effect.
Sure. Okay. So no abortion laws. Appreciate it. That's your opinion. Very honest about it. Thank you. Hasn't changed my mind, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Hasn't changed my mind. Haha. Got her.
Okay, so that was pretty tiring. That was pretty exhausting. I find it funny that at the end she's just bringing up my points. So whether it's
this was exhausting, but I think this is just Steven and Not Gay Jared talking. I miss Not Gay Jared. Steven treated Not Gay Jared like shit. All these years they were friends, and then he kicked him to the curb. So depressing. Woman telling an emotional backstory. Steven, geez, the pigeon. Oh yeah, Steven doesn't have any emotion or any empathy, but that's okay. Empathy is for homosexuals, I would argue. But anyways, I'm gonna stop that recording specifically. I'm gonna upload that as a clip later.